You're seeing some dilapidated living conditions largely as the result of rent control. Jen, you've done some urban archaeology and explored these places. Tell us how bad it gets.
Yeah, so I went to three different rent stabilized properties in New York City in different parts of town and saw some very graphic images of pretty older apartments that once used to be very beautiful properties that turned into decaying, almost like rotting. I compare buildings to human beings. So when they kind of like stay like this, it's kind of a sad scene. It's like a corpse that's kind of dying. So yeah, it's pretty graphic. So one place that we went to, it was in Midtown. Somebody lived there from 1969 up until 2021, and no upgrades and no repairs were done to the property for the entire stay of the tenant, which is pretty common. And so what we saw was, although they had beautiful floors, unfortunately, because there was no upkeep, they were really to the point of no return, and other things like very old items left on the floor. We saw an old Zinger machine and other almost like antique items all over that apartment because it belonged to a hoarder. And then all the appliances were very old, like they belonged to the museum. And other things like holes in the walls in the bathroom. And the faucet that we saw was metal, but it looked like chewed metal. I don't know what happened with it. I don't know how that person used it. Another place that we saw was in Chinatown, and it looked like it was from 1910, and it actually was from 1910 because none of there were really nothing done to the place ever since then. So when we walked into that place, you could immediately feel like this old smell of an old building, kind of decaying building. But more than that, you walk in and you immediately see a bathtub, which is in the kitchen. So you
That's
open this,
wild.
yeah, you open the squeaky door, it goes directly, you see this bathtub and you see the stove and refrigerator, everything in this tiny little space. And you kind of have to go through this before you enter other parts of the apartment. And then the whole decorum of that place was also like it belonged to tenement museum. One thing that the cameras didn't capture that well, but I could see was that the floors were very uneven. They're like slanted, not
Yeah.
just uneven, but slanted. And it has a feeling that is it gonna like collapse on me or something? Like, why is the floor slanting? That's really different. Another thing we saw, just regular signs of the decay, like the ceiling felt like it was almost falling, and there was a lot of peeling paint and just like spider webs on the peeling paint. And you really kind of, it gives this apocalyptic feeling, all these properties, as if, the humans have left the city completely and has been just staying there. So yeah, those are the properties that we saw. There was another one that we saw in Harlem, which was in a little bit of better condition, you would say. But the tragedy of that building is that it was abandoned, It was a classic brownstone, 8 units, all studio units. And some of them were a little bit renovated, but others were just empty. And you could see, just items that, tenants maybe left behind. Again, a lot of like peeling paint, a lot of old appliances. And really the tragedy of that building is just that it was just staying there empty, and they would never see the light of day. Yeah, so this is roughly what we saw. And we, just driving by New York City, we could see a lot of boarded up buildings, especially in Harlem area in Upper West Side. Usually those areas were considered to be up and coming, especially before the
Great.
pandemic. But yeah, you could see a lot of decay. And these scenery that the pictures that I described is just the signs of broader urban decay, because this is happening when there's a historically high housing shortages in New York City. There's only about 2% of vacant apartments. And at the same time, these properties that could be renovated are staying there empty. And the landlords are willing to renovate them, but it's the policies that we have that are putting them in a position where there's no funds for them to do it.
Gosh, here we are near Halloween, and there's an irony. We're talking about one of the most prosperous cities in the world, yet with some of those conditions you're describing, it's almost like you could charge admission for a haunted house. That's really quite sad. Shabification, the story of rent control, is the name of a new film that shows how rent control leads to dilapidated living conditions. It centers in New York City. We are with its filmmaker, Jen Sidorova. Jen, describe to us about some more of these decrepit conditions, like odors or something that we cannot see here on video. We're talking about things like mold and mildew and how all this leads to a lack of safety for tenants.
Most of these, places, you walk in and you have to go a huge flight of stairs because there's no elevators, because there's no really big time renovations done in a lot of these historic buildings that are considered to be historic. And so that alone is, dragging your feet all the way up to the fifth floor and a very narrow staircase. And you can smell everybody's cooking while you're at it. And then you open the squeaky door, and then there's just this smell of kind of mildew and abandonment, really. I don't know if you've ever been into places that have not been inhabited for a long time, but they usually have this distinct smell of kind of a decaying building. And these are, the properties that we're seeing in the Midtown. This is primetime property. You could see it's large enough, and it was once a very desirable property. And the properties in Chinatown, they're quite big as well. There was a quite large 2-bedroom, I would say, apartment, and it's in the busy street. It's very desirable. You could see, things like old newspapers taped to the tables. When you go into the bathrooms, you could see these, bluish sinks that, used to be popular in the 70s. They usually don't do them anymore. All those things that remind either an old movie or maybe visiting your grandparents when you were a little kid. Really, what goes through your mind is we're in New York City, which is the center of the world, and yet we have properties like this right in the middle of it, which is very sad. And it makes you think of how come policies that had good intentions led to this, right? And that's kind of the journey that I'm going through still up to this day with me as a small property owner and other small property owners who are uncovering the story to the world and to the policymakers.
Yeah, it's almost like you're entering a time capsule into an era 50 years ago or so. Rent control can help tenants in the short term for obvious reasons. There's a limit on how much rent they can be charged, but over the long term, it can lead to awful living conditions and blighted neighborhoods, because when there is a limit to how much rent tenants can pay, well, then landlords have no incentive to improve the property. And then tenants also don't want to move out. They want to keep that sweet deal, the low rent. Well, Jen, tell us more about your documentary film, Shabification, and then how someone can watch.
Yes, definitely. You can always just message me on Instagram at Jen_Sidorova, and I will send you the screener. We are looking at right now finding it a permanent home at one of the outlets. But for now, we're taking it to film festivals, so we want people at those festivals to watch it first. I like being a cultural anthropologist, but at the same time, it's just more sad than exciting. Because first of all, a lot of these landlords have only one property, and it's been in the family for a long time. And all they're trying to do is hold on to that. And they're really not making any money on this. Sometimes they burden the taxes, and the upkeep is more than what they're making. People are paying $500, $600 for a one-bedroom apartment in these rent-controlled properties sometimes, but taxes and upkeep alone can be $1,500 easy for a one-bedroom in New York. And we are thinking about alternatives, what can make this better, and programs like housing vouchers, or maybe making it so it's easier to build new housing in bigger cities like New York City could make it better. So that's what we're exploring at the moment.
Well, a lot of stories look at the tenant lens and look through that filter at something like rent control and landlord-tenant issue. This gives you the perspective from the landlord side so that you get the whole picture. Some pretty scary stuff near Halloween here, Jen. Thanks so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You can watch this one next.